There. Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Let's begin in prayer. Gracious God, we give thanks to you for the opportunity we have to be in service to you this day. We thank you for the opportunity for learning, for my colleagues who are engaged in the process of helping others learn knowledge, but also learn about you. And I pray that you would give us wisdom and discernment today as we think creatively with a sense of imagination about the ways in which we are to provide online education in our institutions. We know that we are not capable of doing this on our own, but we look to you for guidance and direction. We pray especially for those today who are suffering, those who have been impacted by COVID-19, those who have lost lives, those who are on the front lines providing care. We ask for your continual provision and care for them. We pray for our institutions as we struggle and think through what it means to provide education to our students this fall. We pray that this seminar would help guide us and enhance our vision about what you want for us and your church and your kingdom. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Mark Maddix, and I serve as the Dean of the School of Theology and Christian Ministry at Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, California. And it's a real privilege for me to be able to provide this webinar as a part of FOLD. Just a little context, the presentation I'm giving today was a presentation that I had planned to present at the 2020 Access Conference hosted by Executive Director Mary Lowe. And it was right on the edge of COVID. And so I wasn't able to attend, not because I had COVID, but because I had the flu. And so I was afraid to fly to Dallas with the flu in the midst of COVID. And so I wasn't able to make this presentation. So this presentation that I'm giving today is actually the presentation I would have provided there. And the focus is around, as you can see, the theme 2020 vision. What are the challenges and opportunities for online education in a Christian context? I want to say up front that my own background, I've been teaching and working in online education for 22 years now. I was an early adapter back in the late 90s and helped develop several master's and MDiv programs that were fully online. And interesting enough, I moved here to Point Loma 4 years ago, and the School of Theology that I'm a part of now actually hadn't done a lot of online education. So I've kind of been starting over again and beginning to help faculty reimagine what online education is about. So this presentation really is a bit of an overview. It's the big scope, and I hope that as we go through this at the end, we're going to give you time for questions, and I look forward to hearing from your expertise as we have conversation about this topic. So in Charles Dickens' famous book, A Tale of Two Cities, he depicts the challenges faced during the French Revolution and the drama of his famous phrase, "It is of the best of times, it is of the worst of times. It is the age of wisdom, it is the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, or we're all going directly, well, the other way." Dickens' famous quote, I think, may provide a context for us as we explore a 2020 vision of online Christian education, the challenges and the opportunities, because I think it gives us, particularly today, a glimpse into our current reality. For some institutions, these are the best of times. For others, these are the worst of times. And for some, it is the season of light, and for others, it's the season of darkness. Some institutions who were early in adapting and developing online classes and programs are well ahead of the game. But for others who came to the party late, catching up and being prepared with the demands of online education may seem overwhelming. Institutions continue to wrestle with the benefits of online education because they don't have a clear vision of how to support and sustain effective programs. Many of them see online education as a means to stop the proverbial financial and enrollment hemorrhage of their institution without recognizing the need for technology and personnel and infrastructure to do online education well. I, along with many of you, have experienced the pain and frustration of this myopic view of online education. So I think it's important in the beginning to name it. Depending on which of these two cities, a tale of two cities you find yourself or your institution, it impacts your own vision of online education. For institutions today, they're experiencing the best of times. You have a clear vision about what you're doing. But for others, it might be the worst of times because your vision is blurred, it is veiled, and you can't see clearly what the future holds. And I'd say particularly now in the midst of COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, as we think about ways to prepare our institutions for education in the fall. To ensure our vision is unhindered, it requires us to undergo the proper eye examination. The examination may include opportunities and challenges, and this dates me a bit, but if you go back to George Benson's 1985 song, 2020 Vision, he says, if I knew back then what I know now, if I understand the what, the when, the why, and the how, now it's clear to me what I should have done, but hindsight is 2020 vision. Often hindsight is 2020 vision, and it requires us to learn from our mistakes and failures to embrace the future. My wife is a nurse, and she works at the Shiley Eye Center, which she helps with cataract surgeries. So I refer to her regarding some of this eye terminology. But optometrists tell us that having 20/20 vision does not necessarily mean you have perfect vision. It requires other visual skills, peripheral awareness of side vision, eye coordination, depth perception, focusing ability, color vision, all contributes to our ability to see well and to have 20/20 vision. As you're aware, some of us may see well from a distance. Others of us are able to see up close. Some of us are farsighted. Some of us are nearsighted. Others of us, well, like myself, I can't see well up close or far away. I'm just thankful I have my progressive lens so I can see. It seems that some faculty and administrators are leading online education with a fuzzy and cloudy vision, while others can be farsighted and nearsighted when it comes to their vision of online education. So in order to have 20/20 vision, we must address the visual impairments by naming the challenges we face and to provide a 20/20 vision for the future. We must explore those opportunities. So what I'm attempting to do here in this presentation is to provide what I would say some of the overarching challenges. This is not inclusive by any means. Some of these are challenges that I've invited from many of you, and you've given me insight about those. And then the second part is I want to provide a list of opportunities to think about as it relates to the future. So the first challenge I think that we face within online education is the challenge of an identity crisis and still role confusion. Erik Erikson's psychosocial stage of development indicates that adolescents aged 12 to 18 years old experience a crisis of identity or role confusion. Here, adolescents search for a sense of self and personal identity through the intense exploration of personal values, beliefs, and goals. In many ways, online education, in theory and practice, continues to struggle with its identity role within institutions in general in particular because online education is still viewed as, quote, inferior to traditional forms of education. I'm sure you have experienced this often and found this to be a challenge at times in your institution. The field still struggles with credibility because in many institutions, including my own, online education is viewed as a second-class education. I found this particularly true this past spring as we all pivoted our programs from face-to-face to online in the midst of COVID-19. And as I worked with faculty, my own faculty and faculty across campus, it became very much real again of how faculty feel about online education. And so faculty continue to struggle with seeing online education as a valid means of education. I remember back in the late 90s, even in around 2000, when my former institution where we began to develop online programs, this was in the early days, and one of our senior faculty members who teaches New Testament, he was adamant that we couldn't do online education well. So he said, since I'm adamant against it, and I want to prove that it's not good, I want to teach the first class. And so he taught the class. He gave way more content than he possibly should have given in the class, about killed the students. But at the end, he said, in my 25 years of teaching, this was one of the most meaningful and productive learning experiences I've ever had. And so he became, for us, our online evangelist to help sell it to other faculty to see the validity of the program. Also, many administrators view online education primarily as a way to address the growing economic challenges of their institution. They see it a way to bail them out. They don't often see the quality of the education, but they see it primarily in an economical way. We know that online education, if it's done well, with the appropriate infrastructures, with having recruiters, admissions counselors, IT personnel, course developers, all the people that it takes to make online education done well, often is not an enterprise that is somewhat inexpensive for an institution. And over the years, after all our success, after all of our research, after all of the hard work that we've done, I suggest to you that we still struggle with an identity crisis. The second challenge we face is a competitive market. The growth of online education is paramount. I know here in my institution, we are beginning to look at offering some master's programs, and we begin to look at the market, and the market is just flooded. When we began back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there wasn't any competition. But today the market's flooded. For example, in theological education, the Association of Theological Schools reports that 143 of the 175 schools that offer distance ed, with 26 of them offering fully online degrees. Now, this is great for students because students have more options, but it becomes challenging for institutions. Also, the continual decline in online education, both for undergraduate and seminary level education, many are facing the worst of times. We hear of colleges and seminaries closing. Over 20 to 25% of ATS schools now are embedded seminaries. Here in the West Coast where I live, we've seen in Portland, Concordia, Portland University close. They had this dynamic, growing online program, but continued to experience increased financial demands, and they closed. Bethel Seminary, that's connected with Bethel up in Minneapolis, here in San Diego, closed this past year. Claremont School of Theology, which was in the LA area, has now moved to Willamette University. You know these examples as well. The enrollment of the MDiv degree, for example, has declined 20% over the last decade, while the MA degree has increased by 15%. My point here is that brick and mortar schools are being forced to move online, which makes the market even more competitive. Our own Melinda Thompson, hi Melinda if you're there, she indicated that one of the other issues is return on investment. The ROI continues to be a challenge for theological education because many congregations don't require education for ordination. And many evangelical churches do their own ministerial preparation. And at the same time, mainline denominations that require seminary education are on a decline. So the second challenge here is the market seems to be flooded and very competitive. The third challenge is one that we know so well. It's the challenge of formation, both spiritual and ecclesial. And I've included ecclesial here because I think when we often talk about spiritual formation in our academic settings, we're primarily talking about personal formation and not so much communal formation that happens in the context of the church or within a community. This continues to be one of the primary concerns among faculty and ecclesial leaders, particularly in theological education. And this is the crux of the question: how can you do education that is disembodied? I'm sure all of us, even right now, with all the Zoom meetings we've been a part of, we're zoomed out. We're grateful we have the technology, but we recognize that it's not the same as being together face to face. So how can students be formed without interacting with other humans? This is one of the primary questions we still face in education in general and specifically in theological education. Edwin Van Darrell's article, Online Theological Education, 3 Under-Theorized Issues, illustrates this challenge that ministerial formation should include an apprenticeship approach to learning, that worship is essential, that's the ecclesial connection, and formation is needed. So how can persons be formed in disembodied learning? Fortunately, we have a list of resources here among my friends and colleagues who have been addressing this issue over the past several years. From Stephen Marieslow's book, Ecology of Faith in a Digital Age, where they create this sense of an ecology of formation, is a great resource to address how formation takes place ecologically, not only within the context of the educational institution, but within the church, the family, the community more broadly. Mary Hess's book, Engaging Technology in Theological Education, or Jones, Cartwright, Etzel, and Jackson's book, Teaching the World, where they argue that Paul's ministry was primarily done from distance through writing of letters, or Julie Lytle's book, Faith Formation 4.0, or even, shameless self-promotion here, my own work around textual theological education that includes embodied and embedded approach to education. All of these continue to provide a challenge for us around formation. And while we've done significant work here, much more is needed to be done. In a recent study by the Auburn Institution called Not Being There, their original document by ATS a couple of decades ago was called Being There. Not being there, it indicates that student outcomes are equal or better than traditional face-to-face education. But the data is still inconclusive regarding formation. While we've made great strides here, I think this is an area where we still need to do more significant work. The fourth challenge is regulatory issues. Many of you know this much better than I do. I'm sorry that you do know it better than I do. This is a difficult landscape. Regulatory issues change daily and by state. Rebecca Hoey from Northwest College, as a part of FOLD, she said it is one of the biggest challenges that we face. State authorization, SARA, financial challenges in many institutions limits our ability to reach students in other states. For example, here in California, we're still not a SARA state. And I've provided here basically a SARA chart that we have on our website. Many of you have this as a part of your institution. This is connected to where students can do internships, where they cannot do internships. A recent example for us is we faced here in San Diego, we're only 15 miles to Mexico and to Tijuana. And so students who are just across the border for us are ineligible to participate unless they have a dual address, both in the US and in Mexico. Students from Mexico can take face-to-face classes if they have a visa, but online students are not able to enroll in online programs. A recent article in Inside Higher Ed indicates that other issues such as the 50% rule, how we view credit hours, requiring regular online discussion as a part of the class, become important parts of the regulatory issues we face. Since these continue to change, it's important to have someone in your institution who is giving specific work to knowing exactly what's taking place regarding state, federal levels of regulatory issues in relationship to your online programs. Challenge number 5. Don't worry, I'm going to get to some good stuff here, some positive things. 5th challenge is providing student support at a distance. I'm sure all of us have recognized that specifically in the midst of COVID-19. Students struggling in the midst of having resources available, providing psychological support and care. Jenna Gillett Swan, in her article, Challenges of Online Learning, Supporting Engaging the Isolated Learner, indicates that students at a distance continue to struggle with anxiety regarding keeping up with technology, completion of their classwork, and utilization of library resources. Another major challenge in providing support for students with learning disabilities, whether it includes subtexting lectures, audio lectures, or transcribing materials for visually impaired. Each of these who need accommodation, which they should be given those accommodations, impact the ways in which we provide support for students. Our own Hugo Guerrero from Argentina, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong there, indicated that library resources, particularly in theological education, continues to be a challenge for students. While that is a challenge for students, particularly around the world in underdeveloped countries, it still remains a challenge for many of us in first world countries. More and more publishers are making digital materials available, and I've listed a couple examples here that I think are helpful. I particularly would lean toward Tom Phillips's from Claremont School of Theology. His digital theological library is a great resource, and it requires an annual subscription. You're also aware that one of the challenges is the mental health of students, particularly from a distance. How do we provide support and care for students who are not with us? They're from a distance, taking classes, whether online or in a hybrid format. How do we provide the kind of counseling resources to care for them? In a 2017 survey by American College Health Association, almost 64% of students reported that in the last year, they had felt overwhelming anxiety. 42% of them said they felt so depressed that it was difficult to function. Though some of this increase is due to much more awareness of mental health issues, which is a good thing, it still shows that there's a growing need for resources, especially students at a distance. Providing appropriate student support for distant learners might be one of the biggest challenges we face. The 6th challenge is faculty training. According to the Alban Institute study, it states that faculty training is the biggest challenge that ATS schools face. A recent ATS Dean survey indicated 60% of deans say faculty training is the chief challenge. Only a fifth, about 21% of deans on the report, indicated that faculty take training and teaching online. And another 49% say they encourage faculty training. I suggest to you, and my colleagues, you're aware of this, that encourage is not the same as require. And it's worth noting that half of the deans report that less than a quarter, 21% of their faculty who teach online have received some kind of formal online distant training. Another aspect of faculty development that continues to cause issues is intellectual property. I know in my institution, this is the one that we always seem to find ourselves entangled with. Given the collaborative nature of developing online courses, most courses are now no longer developed by just one instructor. We have course developers, we have content experts, there's a team of people who are involved, graphic designers. So the question about ownership continues to be a challenge for us. Does the university own the course? Does a faculty member own the course? Is it joint ownership? What if you want to use some of the materials in another class? There doesn't seem to be any real clear answer, but I would suggest to you that this is an area that we need to give more attention to, and we need to have clear policies about how we address the issue of intellectual property. So in this tale of two cities, there's always more challenges to identify. So now we turn to the best of times in online education, or some of the opportunities, which I think you'll find, hopefully, to be more positive. The first opportunity that we have in the context of online education is accessibility. It's feasible and missional. And I put these three together because I think within the Christian context that while it can be accessible, while it can be flexible, it seems that the reason we should be doing online education or education in general is because it's missionally based. Accessibility and flexibility has been one of the hallmarks of online education. The ability to provide education to cross borders, to reach students in different contexts, many of which don't have the capacity to come to our brick and mortar campuses, those who may live far away from our campuses, those who, because of other demands of work, aren't able to move to our campuses. And so online education, I would suggest to you, is a means of grace to those outside our communities, even those outside the Christian community, because it provides a witness of the gospel by providing accessible education. In my previous institution, the reason we offered online education was because our president viewed our institution as a land-grant institution. We were to serve congregations in our field, if you will, and within our mission, those within small congregations in the Northwest. And so as a result, what we did became missionally driven. In the Auburn Institute study, not being there, they indicate that a good reason for schools to be optimistic about the possibility of increased enrollment through online education and degrees is because ATS enrollment, while it has declined by 11% over the last decade, that online enrollment grew by 195%. More than half, 51% of schools offer their degrees fully online, and that grew in their enrollment. So the first opportunity is accessibility, flexibility, and mission. The second opportunity for online education is that it's contextual and it's embedded. Those of us who've been doing this a while, we know that online education provides an opportunity for students to remain in their local context while completing their educations. They can apply what they're learning now instead of later. Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy reminds us that problem-posing education, education that you can take and use now, is more transformative than banking education, transmissive education. You get it, you bank it, you're going to use it later. Much of traditional education is more that way. It's transmissive. It can be less transformative. Contextual education is embedded. It's education in real life. Online education provides a network for what Ivan Illich calls a learning web that recognizes that students are situated in specific family and church contexts that instructors need to integrate into the learning experience. Online education needs to include situated and contextual ecology of real life in order to maximize transformational learning. If appropriate contextual assignments are provided, students can collaborate with local businesses, educational institutions, congregations to embed learning. An example of this is in our MA program in spiritual formation. We required students to participate in local small groups in their congregation to lead others in spiritual direction, while at the same time being mentored by an experienced pastor, leader for their own spiritual accountability. I think especially in theological education, online education is a great way for the church and the academy to partner together. And theologically, I think it's bringing theological education back to the church where it belongs. Since theology is done within the context of the church as the people of God. The third opportunity is the development of online learning communities. A recent study indicated that 89% of students and 79% of instructors stated that building community in online courses is more challenging than building community in face-to-face courses. Again, we know this from our own experience. Why do they make these claims? Well, because of communication, of time, participation. Online education includes online learning communities that are central to learning and to formation. But because learning experiences are reduced, it's what psychologists call transactional distance. And the way that we reduce transactional distance is through social presence. Alfred Rivari says that transactional distance is a psychological and communication space between learner and instructor. It's reduced when students engage in more dialogue. He also says that the frequency of communication enhances social presence online. Effective online learning communities are fostered by the social presence of both faculty and students. Other aspects of learning of communities also provides a means of social equality. This becomes particularly important in the midst of diverse groups of students, students of color, students with disability, to ensure that students have equal access to learning and that they're viewed as equal within the context of the learning environment. A study showed that what's most important in building community, well, you can see here that students rank instructor modeling as most important, while interaction and dialogue as fourth, but faculty rank interaction and dialogue as important and instructional modeling as fourth. I think this illustrates the difference of expectation in an online class. While I think faculty recognize the need for the importance of interaction and dialogue, many students are looking to the professor to model the kind of education that needs to be taking place in an online environment. One final area in developing online learning communities is the increased use of social media. You know, social media is in front of us all the time. We know now that students don't often respond to emails anymore. We have to use text or through social media. And our digital natives who are engaged in social media, we need to find ways to include social media as a part of our learning experience. The fourth opportunity is that online education can be measured and assessed. In the early days, this was a big question. Can it be assessed? And we know now that it can be, and it can show that online learning is effective learning. We can we can measure and assess student learning to see how effective learning takes place or doesn't take place. While assessment may be more difficult and challenging at a distance, it's a great opportunity to assess student learning in our classes. In other words, it provides a more constructivist educational approach, and particularly as it relates to adult students. We've come a long way in assessment. Our assessment strategies now include the use of rubrics, collaborative assignments, peer assessment, e-portfolios, self-reflection, and rubrics now are the norm, which they should be. So I would say this is a great opportunity, but also say it's a place that helps us to validify that what we're doing is effective education. The fifth opportunity is global education. Online Christian education expands outside of our own context and around the world. It's not that we're making education for people around the world. I think this is important. But we are educating with Indigenous global leaders around the world. Indigenous global leaders educate and enhance both faculty and student learning through a diverse learning context. Again, in my own experience in developing master's programs, we set our programs up in a cohort model where every year one Indigenous leader would be a part of our program. He or she would only pay tuition within his or her own country. So we had students from, for example, from India, Costa Rica, from Africa, from the Netherlands, and all these students helped us study together, to learn together, to be more effective, to be global in our educational perspective. Online education is growing around the world. I have worked with several schools, seminaries in South America, the Philippines, throughout Europe, who are well ahead of the game in the marketing and development of online programs. The sixth and the last opportunity, I'm going to do a little envisioning and a sense of imagination about the future. I think the greatest opportunity we have, especially right now in the midst of COVID-19 and post-COVID, is developing a new imagination by the grace of God to dream new dreams and to cast new visions for the future. The future is ripe with opportunities to develop new approaches and models to online education. In the last 2 decades, we have seen traditional brick and mortar schools move to the development of a variety of educational pedagogies, such as flipped classrooms, online formats for posting materials, advanced LMS systems, and we thank God for advanced LMS systems, and recently, the use of video conferencing, and now through Zoom or Google Meets, we find ourselves with an array of technologies available. We have seen the movement in fully online ATS accredited MDiv programs, something that we never thought we'd see happen, that doesn't require residency. We've come a long way, and we should celebrate these developments. But we need to be ready for the next wave of education innovation. With the fast development of technology, that includes virtual simulation, avatars, artificial intelligence, we need to be prepared and be ready to begin to utilize these new mediums. For example, my colleagues in the field of nursing already have virtual simulations as a part of most of their curriculums. Could it be that virtual simulation could help us develop those who prepare for ministry, for preaching, for pastoral care, for teaching? Could it be that artificial intelligence, with some of its moral concerns, could help us educate the next generations of students? Don't worry, robots are not going to take your job, or at least not yet. But already smart content is being developed that include video content and lectures. AI is helping to enhance global and individual learning by providing more customized education instead of education for the masses. There's also mobile learning, or M-learning, that includes hand phones and PDAs. Or what about virtual learning, which is increasing in higher ed? The development of avatars is enhancing distance education because it provides a more visual and interactive component in learning. Could you imagine every student having a virtual headset and would receive instruction and discussion through them? I know it sounds a little Jetson-like, but it's here. Okay, I'm way on my league here. This is not my area of expertise by any means. But as I was working on this presentation, I noticed how much of the literature is moving into these areas. And in the same way that we embraced online education and we helped our institutions make the shift from face-to-face to online, we're now beginning to get more comfortable with that. And now as technology begins to change, we'll need to adapt to these new challenges. While some of this technology may not be financially feasible for us now, it's only a matter of time that these resources will be available for everyone. So these are some of the opportunities that for me are very encouraging and I think provide opportunities for us in the future. Back to Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. He reminds us during a trying time in history, which we're in right now, a trying time in the midst of COVID-19, our institutions are struggling to figure out how to prepare itself for the fall and for the future. For some, it's the best of times. For others, it's the worst of times. And depending on where you are and where your institution may be, you may find that you need to develop a clear vision, a clear perspective about the opportunities that are ahead. Or you may find that your institution's vision is very blurred It's not clear at all. It seems to be reactive, just trying to survive. I hope that collectively we can work together and embrace a 2020 vision for the future of online education in the decade ahead. Thank you, and thanks be to God for the opportunity we've been given to serve Christ in the church through our educational ministries. I'll be glad to take questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your excellent presentation. We have a number of people in the room. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask of Mark? Also, feel free to post any questions that you might have in the chat room during the this question period. So, Mark, I've got one.
I'm going to stop sharing there. So, okay.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got one. You mentioned library resources. That seems to be a big thing, especially for schools that are trying to establish accreditation and need to provide their students, if they're online schools, with resources that would be useful to them, library databases and things like that. You mentioned two such databases, one out of libguides.org and another whd.org,
right,
if I've written this down correctly. And then a Claremont School of Theology library database. What are some resources? What are some ways people can connect to these kinds of tools to assist their online students if their own personal libraries don't have them?
Yeah, great question. So the digital theological digital library by the Church of the Nazarene, that is open to the public, so that's a free resource that anybody can use. The theological library that's connected with Claremont, you would need to contact Tom Phillips. I know that it's a subscription. That is a massive theological library. It is one of the best I've seen, and I don't know how many schools they're taking as a part of that, but I would highly recommend you contact him, and I can provide that information for you.
Please do. If you would, drop it in the chat room.
Okay.
Maybe his email address or whatever, but I've written his name down, Tom Phillips. I know of one school in particular that reached out to me recently, and they said, we're trying to work on accreditation, but we don't have the kinds of things that other schools have, namely a library, a digital library that would enable all of our online students to be able to have equal access. So these are important tools for that. Israel has a question. I'll read it. How do you perceive the pending new ATS revised standards impacting emerging online education in theological schools? Great question, Israel. What do you think, Mark?
To be honest, Israel, I'm not as up to date on ATS right now, just because I'm not working in an ATS school. So I don't really know specifically how to answer that. Maybe somebody else in the group may have more information about that.
I went to I may have some insight, and then we can take the thoughts from others. I went to Lester Ruiz. He's our liaison with ATS. He's one of the directors of assessment and institutional evaluation. He held a webinar earlier this week, a sort of workshop for faculty who, or administrators who wanted to ask questions of the redeveloped standards. And the one thing that struck me in particular was that ATS is dropping its focus on modality. That is, it doesn't matter if your program is being offered online or on campus or hybrid. That doesn't matter as much as your ability to demonstrate that you're meeting your student learning outcomes and your program outcomes. So one of the last holdouts in terms of resource-based assessment has just been dropped by our professional accrediting body. We're now in a world of student learning outcomes or outcomes-based assessment more intentionally and more fully because of these redeveloped standards. So Israel, what do you see as as a pressing question for your institution. And it's okay for you to unmute and just talk.
All right, thank you. So a lot of uncertainty. I think I only have an observation. Mark, thank you for your great presentation. It was very affirming for those of us who've been teaching for a while. I have also been teaching over 22 years online. So just an observation, and that is, you know, we've called this disruptive technology. And I think we're finally seeing the disruption. The ATS revised standard is just one indication of it in terms of dramatically rethinking the nature of education. You've mentioned a few, right? The mythic credit hour, and to what extent that's of any significance to learning or assessing educational effectiveness or learning effectiveness is one. So I'll be curious to see if that goes on. But thank you, Sebastian, that observation about no longer looking at a frame of reference of modalities as of being of any real significance to outcomes of learning and ways of teaching in carrying out the mission of even theological education is, I think it's just a great example of finally the disruption is starting to happen.
Sure, and the biennial is going on right now, by the way. So the redeveloped standards will take place. They'll be implemented on July 1st, so a week from today. And interestingly, I need to say one thing. They're maintaining an emphasis on modality for doctoral programs. So doctoral programs will still have some kind of residency requirement. But I imagine that over the next several years, with the exceptions that people will be asking for, that will be become less and less of an issue. But everything else is the way in which Lester characterized it. So. Oh, and Israel, I'd like to thank you as well. You're one of the leaders in this initiative. You gave a presentation that I attended almost a decade ago on transactive assessments and learning models. So thank you for your work in this area as well. Any other questions for Mark?
Maybe I could just raise a question to the group. What's your response regarding the challenges and opportunities that are presented? Be interested just to hear from you.
So Mark, one that I'm also observing, and again, I'm not at the center of gravity of theological education, since my work is with continuing education. Mm-hmm. But again, observation about, again, if I'll go ahead and use the word disruption, the disruption about the nature of theological faculty, along with the nature of scholarship, the impact of the nature of a theological degree for ministry. But the things that you identified as, you know, the anxiety and resistance of theological faculty, I think has a lot to do with self-understanding of you know, what a faculty is supposed to be, what their area of expertise is supposed to address. And we've always known and confessed the disconnect between the models and content of theological education with the practice of ministry. That's always been a challenge. But I think that the things that you mentioned is just going to exacerbate that conversation about what is the nature of a theological school faculty.
Yeah, that's good, Israel. And I think particularly right now in the midst of COVID and post-COVID, at least, I mean, my institution is a traditional undergrad institution that has graduate programs. I think we're either going to go one way or the other when it comes to online education after this. In other words, faculty are either going to embrace it and say, this is something that we've learned from, but I'm afraid it will actually have the opposite impact, is that many of them would say, we were thrust into this, we have to do this because we can't meet face to face. And it will fuel their sense of this being an inferior form of education. And I've picked that up already from faculty, that those who are adamantly against it are even more strong against it now because they have to do it. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out as we move forward. Yes. I'll unmute. There you go. You're unmuted now.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Tyndale, where I just retired from Tyndale last month, went 100% online like many institutions in the space of 3 days. Now, we did do a faculty training session before we launched. And what I found frightening, I've been there 15 years, the faculty who were attending that training session are the same ones who actively have resisted over the past 15 years. So they are, as you said, being thrust into it, but now we're encountering something problematic. And that is they have, we can teach them which buttons to push on for an LMS to work, but we have not done any pedagogy training. And as I pointed out to Tyndale, since we're fully online in the summer and we're going to be fully online in the fall, the only opportunity we've got to do that training is in the month of August. And of course, I've got papers written on strategies and tactics for online learning. It's all set to go, but we have to get them together in the center of a COVID virus.
Right.
And as I've floated this idea, what's been coming back from the faculty themselves is, oh, well, we know what we're doing now. We've done it once. I actually got into a fairly strong argument with the chair of Christian Studies in the undergraduate program. He handed me a final exam made up of 100 multiple choice questions. And I said, Ben, why do we need an exam of that nature? He said, well, I have to survey the field. Can't we survey the field with 50 questions? Can't we survey the field with 25? Why is it this big? Because I've always done it that way.
Right. Yep.
Right. Now, my fear is that we're going to launch into September, everyone forced to be online, but with the attitude that they know what they're doing, when it's demonstrable that they don't know what they're doing. They are kind of diving in and hoping for the best. But the rigor of the fully online programs has not been implemented with the broad mass of faculty. And my worry is that broad mass are going to come out of this saying, as you pointed out, this is inferior. But the point will be, why is it inferior? When we have proven in the fully online programs that it is equal to or better than. Mm-hmm. That argument is settled at this point. Yeah. But now we're going to have to deal with the faculty attitude. And my concern is that by the time we actually get to the faculty training, it might be a little too late.
Yeah, it's a great point. And matter of fact, tomorrow, one of our course developers on campus and I are providing a Zoom session like this for faculty to help them think about how do you take your face-to-face class and put it online.
Right.
To teach it even in a hybrid format, because you're right, in the spring, everybody was just thrust into it and they just did whatever. Mm-hmm. And pedagogically, they really don't know even how to design an online class. Sure. So that's something we're kind of have to rebuild now. How do you design those?
Mm-hmm. Fortunately, I think most of the schools that have already invested in online learning have a model in place.
Right.
That has been proven academically sound.
Right.
Now, can we transition that model to the broader audience?
Yeah, thank you. That's good.
Yeah, I'd like to, as long as we've got Larry on the line here, point out Larry has also been involved in a project over the past several years of ensuring that his online programs are compliant for disability access.
Yes.
So it's what we've got in the situation that you're talking about right now is analogous to what I started with 20 years ago when I first showed up at Kenrick Glennon Seminary. We gave the faculty a workshop, or at least they had received a workshop in how to use PowerPoint prior to my showing up as as the coordinator for instructional technology. And they believed, because of their PowerPoint training, that they understood everything that was needed to be known about the use of appropriate technologies in classroom teaching and learning environments. And that was something I had to work against for the first couple of years. Mm-hmm. People saying, "Oh, I know PowerPoint, and that's all that that I need to know." So they thought they were fully trained.
Right.
That's right.
And I think,
since you've mentioned it, on the issue of compliance, I've just finished a paper. I've sent it to Sebastian already, on what faculty need to be doing in order to take steps towards compliance. And really, there are 5 points. I don't want faculty getting all twisted out of joint. There are 5 points that they need to be aware of to carry forward towards ADA compliance. And that paper, is it being published, Sebastian, or you know?
Right now, we wanted at least 12 papers for this book, and we've received, I think, about 5. So
okay.
If Mark will give us or donate to us his presentation for today, that gives us about half of what we need. And we could move forward with 6 papers. I'd like more. So this is a good time for a commercial. Anyone who's in here who's written anything about how to teach online, please send it to me. Or actually, send it to Vicki Dunham if you have your email address. If you don't, send it to me. And we'll consider it for inclusion in that book. If we can hit 12 articles, we can publish very quickly. And Tim Westbrook is serving as a co-editor on this thing, and we can have this thing turned around in time for the fall term. But we need some more articles.
Okay, yeah, I'll be glad to. I need to clean up mine a little bit, but yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
I can certainly dig out the one on strategies and tactics for online learning. I think it's on one of the hard drives back there somewhere.
And this is a different one than what you've already sent me. So yeah, I wouldn't mind having 2 from you, Larry.
Okay.
Larry gets to do this all over again at another college. If you want to talk about that, Larry, because you're coming in on the ground floor, I think, in terms of the use of these technologies for online teaching and learning.
Yes. A funny thing happened. I retired, and about a week after, the chair of the English department, undergraduate English department, announced that she had been hired as dean of a small Catholic undergraduate school in Northern Ontario. It's called Our Lady Seat of Wisdom. It's been around for about 4 years. Enrollment's about 200. They have absolutely 0 online. And so I've been asked if I can get them up to speed. And so far we're talking about doing a bit of a road trip in July, August. It'll get me into a canoe up in the far north again, which is always fun. But I'll be suggesting to them that we take some fairly basic steps, that we move towards a flipped classroom approach, and that we start thinking about external faculty adjuncts coming in online to teach. And in addition, there is one very large market that is untouched in Canada, and that is our Indigenous peoples, especially in the far north. Now, there are schools, organizations, Contact North is very well known for this, that provide online education to the far north. However, when you look at their curriculum, there is nothing at all on Christianity or on religion as a whole. And so I see this as a huge opportunity, and I'll be putting it to Our Lady Seat of Wisdom. This is an area where we could quickly capitalize on an emerging market without having to go and compete with the mainline universities. I don't want to do another intro psych course. There are thousands of them out there. However, how about a good history of Christianity course? How about a history of Christianity in the Indigenous population? These are areas where I think there is an opportunity for the small denomination-based colleges. It should be pretty interesting.
We're coming to the end of our time, but I'd like to give Mark the opportunity to respond to that in terms of diversity initiatives in light of your presentation. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, Larry, that sounds really good. And I think that's an area we need to give more attention to, particularly, and especially as you've indicated the work that you're doing about especially students with disabilities and providing accommodation. I think those are areas that, at least in my experience, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
So we need some people helping lead the way. I'm glad to hear that you're doing that work to lead us in those directions. Because most faculty, especially in this environment right now, because everybody's just trying to survive,
Yes.
there's not a lot of attention given to those kind of areas. You know, I know at our university, because, you know, we're planning to come back in a hybrid format. Students will be on campus, partly will be online, partly be face-to-face. And the accommodation issue is becoming even a bigger issue with COVID-19. And particularly, you know, what if a student can't come and be a part of your class? How are you going to provide accommodations? Or I know I've had a student at the undergrad level who has is nearly blind, and so even just lighting in the room and how we prepare learning spaces, you know, all those things aren't often thought about when we're thinking about the masses that we're educating. So thank you.
That's right. And, you know, the reality is when the law is enforced, everything must be in place before the student shows up.
Right.
Rather than using the, I will accommodate your needs when you get here.
Right.
And you'll find that there's some wonderful resistance that you encounter with faculty. I had one fellow taught systematic theology, and I took his the videos and I isolated the audio because it goes out to assistive devices easier than the audio through an MP4. And he got cross with me. He said, I don't want those to be available to students. I want them to sit and watch the videos. I said, that's fine, but under the law, it's required. And so we came up with a compromise, which is actually, I thought, very clever. We can embed in the student profile methods to unlock aspects within the learning management system so that the student who requires the audios will automatically receive them, whereas nobody else will.
Mm-hmm.
Gives the professor more control, but it also says that we are meeting the legal requirements.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you very much, Larry, for your contribution to this discussion, and Mark, for your responses throughout, and for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for participating. And if you like a copy of this, I'll be glad to send it your way.
And I'll have a link of this within the next few minutes. I'll leave it on my Zoom until we get a chance to move it to distancelearningdirectors.org, which is where it will be hosted on the Faith-Based Online Learning Directors website. So we thank Mark for preparing this for access. And it was serendipity that he was not able to give it at access because then he was able to give it to us fresh and new, at least in a timely way. This is extremely timely in its presentation and delivery. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thanks for hosting me.
Certainly. Mark, you opened us in prayer. Would somebody like to close us in prayer?
Sebastian, this is Tim. I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you, Tim. Go ahead.
Lord, we want to thank you for times like this when we can gather together, and we thank you for the blessings of the technology that you had given to us in such an affordable and ubiquitous sort of way where we can gather from all parts of this country or this continent and sometimes around the globe to dream together and to focus together and to think about mission together. Thank you for Mark and his presentation, and we pray that you bless his efforts, be with each of us as we do our best to provide theological education to students in our own areas. And I pray that you will continue to work through these efforts in your name. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everybody. That's a wrap. And I'll send out the link to Vicki, and she'll disseminate it through all the, and they'll disseminate it to everyone.
All right. Thank you. Good to see everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
God
you.
bless everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.